Wonderful. Hello and welcome, Mr. Slayton. Or do you prefer David?
I prefer David, but just thank you
Excellent.
for having me. I'm very charmed to be here.
Well, welcome, David. I'm so happy to have you. This is my second sip the tea. Uh, I'm so delighted to have these chats with authors in particular because I love reading. And it was an excellent excuse to invite you to come and chat with us and talk about your wonderful books and your creative process. So you've probably written more, but you have 5 books published. You have the 3 Adam Binder books, the book about geek gamers, and you have your latest book that is right behind you, looks gorgeous. Oh my gosh, I just had a moment of brain fog. Please forgive me. The Dark Moon, and please complete the title for me. I'm so
Don't worry, Dark Moon, Shallow Sea, and it's an epic fantasy. Um, it's set in a world without any homophobia or transphobia or racism or sexism, and I love that about it. It was
yes.
wonderful to get to write something in a entirely original world where I could leave all the phobias or isms of our world behind.
Oh, I love that. And so, full disclosure, I have started reading it. I pre-ordered it and I was like, ooh, I've got to read this after all of my other reading commitments. And it's so beautiful. I think that it keeps a lot of what is you about the writing that I discovered in your Adam Binder books, but you're magically able to change the tone to be right for epic fantasy. It's beautiful. What was that like moving from urban fantasy into epic fantasy?
Well, it's funny because I actually started out as an epic fantasy author.
Mm,
I just hadn't sold anything. And the genesis of White Trash Warlock was I had written Dark Moon Shallow Sea first. I had written another book that was called Ghost Dragon. And we couldn't make a sale. My agent wasn't getting anywhere with it. Epic fantasy is a very difficult market. Excuse me. So I was getting really frustrated and down about writing and decided, you know what? I'm just going to write something for me. I'm going to make it super gay. I'm going to make it super weird. And at the time, urban fantasy was just dead. Even long running series like the Dresden
yes,
Files had paused.
yes.
It just wasn't anywhere in the market. So I just said, I'm going to throw out all my commercial expectations of publishing it. I'm just going to write it for me and I'll throw it up on Wattpad or my website, give it away to people for free. I was just about done writing it when I thought, oh, I think this might actually be pretty commercial. I think this might, even though urban fantasy is still a challenge in the market, let me send it to my agent when it was done and see what she thought. So I sent it over at like 9, 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday evening. I said, hey, I just kind of want your opinion on this when you get a chance. Do you think it has viability in the market? And I got a email back at like 3 a.m. because she stayed up all night reading it. This is before she had kids, and said, "Oh my gosh, I love it. I think it's awesome." So yeah, so White Trash Warlock ended up being my debut. But over on the side, while we got the contract with Blackstone for the first 3 Adam books, White Trash Warlock, Trailer Park Trickster, Deadbeat Druid, I still had these epic fantasies. And Dark Moon Shallow Sea it's kind of the book of my heart. So it's a funny segue because I actually wrote it first and had such hopes for it. But it did require a lot of rewrites in order for it to get published. And I'm really happy that you did get it when you did, because
Mm.
you got the best version of it of all the versions I've written.
Oh, that's beautiful. I am an avid urban fantasy reader and steampunk, obviously, and both of those genres really have struggled in recent years to get good new debuts from the major publishers. But I also, full disclosure, I started out with epic fantasy. So I love that you're on this journey because as a reader, I'm sort of tagging along, following you through these genres. I mean, not you specifically, although now, but previously. all the authors. But you're right, it was very sort of dire, you know, drear field in urban fantasy, not that much new coming out. And when I saw White Trash Warlock, which I saw at the Tucson Festival of Books, which is where I purchased it on a whim, I was like, wait a minute, I need to see this. I read the back matter and I was like, oh, Guthrie, Oklahoma. I'm going to just need to take this home with me. So intrigued. And it's wonderful. It's a very refreshing entry into the urban fantasy world because it's also rural fantasy. Uh, you are from that part of the world. Would you share a little bit about how you translated some of your experience into the book?
Yeah, and I have to admit, I did cheat a little bit. And one thing I want to say too is, as a gay man who writes books with gay main characters, the whole motivation for me is that we often don't get to write our own stories.
Mm.
So in urban fantasy, it's Katie Edwards with the tarot sequence, and in traditional publication, because independent publication has a lot more to offer, but it's really just us. And Katie Edwards beat me by like a year with his books, and so it's a little weird in that we're kind of in an epic fantasy, as far as I know. Now there's cozy fantasy like TJ Klune's Wonderful
Right.
Things, or
Yes.
my friend Trip Gailey has his beautiful Market of Dreams and Destiny, which actually has a bit of a steampunk angle, so I think you would enjoy that.
Oh, adding it to the list right now. All
And
right.
it's beautiful and literary, and it's set in an alternate history London, so I think it's right up your alley. But in epic traditional, I think it's just me still, which is a very weird place to be. Anyway, to get back to your question, that's kind of where it all came from. Is I grew up in Guthrie. I grew up there in the 70s and 80s, and I loved fantasy. I loved Star Wars. I loved C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and read these when I could get a hold of a good fantasy book. Things like Tad Williams, The Stone of Farewell, like those fantastic books, which is the second in that series, by the way. The Dragonbone Chair, I think, is the first one.
Yeah.
But I could never see myself. Here are these amazing, wonderful, incredible worlds, and but I was never there. People like me were never on the page. People like me were never included. And it kind of broke my heart with epic fantasy a lot. And when I discovered urban fantasy, I love it. I love urban fantasy so much. But again, same thing. It's like, how could you live in a big city and not have queer people or Black people or
Right.
people of color? Like, if you spent any time, most urban fantasy does take place in larger cities, and it's so strange when you read one and it's populated with straight white males, and it's like, have you spent any time in a large American city before? So I see that gap and I feel that pain, so I start writing to try to close it. But the rural part, particularly, is most urban fantasy focuses on someone who's either very high powered, they're very powerful, or they become very powerful over the course of the series, or they're usually someone who is very urban, right? It has that noir angle to it, and again, there's no shade. Everyone's welcome to read and write what they want. But that said, I've always said, why aren't there books about people like me? Why aren't there books about people who grew up rural, who grew up in a trailer, who grew up with food insecurity? One significant example is Charlene Harris, Sookie Stackhouse. Sookie is always worried about food. She's always worried about money. And I felt that so deeply in my bones, how Sookie's like, I have to use the library because I can't afford books.
Right.
And which is something Adam shares with her, with Sookie, Charlene's main character there. That was one thing I thought Sookie Stackhouse and Charlene Harris in general did so well, is writing about people who have a less economically secure background. And it is wonderful to now have it out there in the world and get emails and messages from readers who say, thank you, I grew up queer in a trailer, or I grew up gay and rural. And it's so lovely to see myself reflected in your book. And it just makes me happy. Every time I get one of those messages, I just beam for days.
That's so lovely. And so, as part of the LGBTQ community myself, I have had that experience of not seeing myself in all of the things I love to read and starting to have this sort of renaissance of many genres where queer people are starting to be published by mainstream publishers. And I am very specific because I think we've been writing and telling and creating our stories, but we didn't always get published, or there was this sort of like, please file the rainbow off of that and make it straight. You can write, but you have to, sort of masquerade or code things. And I'm grateful for everything I read that was queer coded growing up. It was very helpful. But having you and others like you write about that experience is profound. And I imagine for younger people, it's offering us a sort of gift I wish I'd had when I was younger.
Definitely. And there's part of me that does wish I was growing up now, or that I was a teenager now, because
Yeah.
there is so much amazing fiction out there.
Mm.
Writers like Sean David Hutchinson, for example, who has incredible YA work, all with it with such gorgeous high concept, or Helen Corcoran, who's writing these fantastic low magic sapphic fantasies in the young adult space. Just lovely stuff. Or I could go on for days, because when I do find an author who nails it, who gets it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to tell the whole world about them. So
Yes, you do. And I've decided 'tis the season of author book reviews. So I feel like it's our sacred duty to tell people about the good things that we've read, especially by people who are typically in marginalized communities because they don't get the press. And we're not going to, I don't think we need to dive into it too much, but there are occasionally these controversies, these scandals that happen on places like Goodreads, where you find that even though marginalized authors have managed to get through all the hoops of publication, someone will still try and tank their career before it even gets going. So it's a treasure every time I find someone who's made it and is published and on the shelves. But talking about our young years and what we read, I have to know, you're from Oklahoma. Did you read Mercedes Lackey? Was Vaniel your first queer character in a fantasy?
it
And
was.
do
It
you still
was.
cry?
I don't still cry now. So a couple of trigger warnings. So the Magic's Pawn, Promise, I forget the third one off the top of my head, by Mercedes Lackey, who
Price. I think it's
Price,
Magic
yes.
Price. Yeah.
Trilogy was the first fantasy that really featured a gay main character. But it is quite tragic. But in the defense of Mercedes Lackey, all of Mercedes Lackey's main characters go through very tragic things. But yeah, there is also as a trigger warning, there is in the third book especially a very brutal gang rape scene. So avoid if that's going to trigger you. But I do have to admit, I got all three from a used paperback store, but I think it was actually my second. My first was Lynn Fuelling's Luck in the Shadows, the Night Runner series, which started in 1996.
Oh my God.
And Lynn was so sweet enough to blurb both White Trash Warlock and Dark Moon Shallow Sea.
Oh.
So, and Mercedes stuff is gorgeous and wonderful. But Lynn's struck a little more home because it was those big, thick, epic stuff. I wish my copy of Luck in the Shadows is in the other room. It's quite aged and yellow and tattered over the years in mass market paperback, those old thick ones. But the Lynn Fuelling series is actually the first time I saw myself on the page and had a spark of, oh my gosh, that's me, or this is a book that has somebody like me. And while there's still a little bit of the homophobia in parts of her world, other parts of it don't have it. And that was the biggest thing that resonated with me, was a more queer normative world. Whereas with Mercedes Lackey's story, he still has to be closeted most of the time, and there's still a lot of the hiding who you are because of society. So
Yeah.
Lynn's work is actually where I first saw myself on the page and got very like, give me more. And thankfully there are 13 of those. So
Right. Oh my gosh. And so I've maybe it's because, you know, you have that little bit of homing instinct as a queer youth, but I absolutely read those, found them all at the library. I first found the Mercedes Lackey books, so that's where I started. And of course, there are horses, and you know, I'm not really a horse girl. I was a dragon girl, but horses are pretty close to dragons. So I was excited for talking psychic horses, right? It's wonderful.
yeah, magic horses.
Magic horses, so lovely. But I particularly am struck how thoughtful you are about talking about these books and how different it is now discussing them than it was when I first read them back in the 90s. That's the 1990s, not the 1890s. They are not that old. They're from only last century for everyone listening. But there were no trigger warnings. No one was pausing to say, by the way, you may be entirely traumatized by this book or this series. And it was sort of accepted that queer characters were going to suffer in books. So these days we talk about it. We talk about burying your gaze. And you sort of are talking about that in the Adam Binder books, I think. Maybe not always head on, but you don't bury your current gaze. However, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it too much for people who haven't read the books, but you do have some meditation on that. So where are you at? I mean, please share some of your thoughts about that trope and your experience grappling with it as an author.
Well, my friend Barbara Ann Wright, whose new book Haunted by Myth actually just came out this last week. So if you want sapphic fantasy with a lot of snark, Haunted by Myth, Barbara Ann Wright, she has a rule that I really appreciate, which is as long as you have plenty of spare queer characters, you can kill as many as you want. Sorry, I should not have said that right when you were taking a sip.
That was wonderful. That was great timing. I love it. But also now I obviously have to go and read her right away. Everything has to go on hold. She sounds amazing.
Oh, she's delightful. And she has she's 13, 14 books out now, all from Bold Stroke, all sapphic, set in, she has fantasy, sci-fi, space opera, all wonderful stuff. But the latest is Haunted by Myth. Okay, so let's just talk about that a little bit. I do think initially Bury Your Gaze was coming from a sympathetic place or an empathetic place. What it was trying to do was say, let me give you this character and teach you to like them and teach you to love them. And then I'm going to kill them, and that's going to develop sympathy. So Bury Your Gaze particularly was kind of criminal in TV. If you had a gay character show up in on television in the 90s, in the aughts, they were going to die. Tara from Buffy is a really good example, right? And if I'm spoiling that for you, well, you've had 23 years, so get over it. But it's unfortunate because what happens is creators I think ultimately they were trying to create sympathy. They were trying to create a sense of humanizing these characters and making them important to the viewer and important to the reader, without the understanding that sometimes you were taking away the only positive example they had. Hence Barbara's comment about spares. So I think it's important to understand now that we're seeing diversity come back. So I think about movies like Jumping Jack Flash in the 80s and the 90s, where the gay character would either be a cliche, a clown, they would die tragically, or they were the villain.
Yeah.
And for a long time, we couldn't have gay villains because then society became a little more aware. And now we're getting to where we can have gay villains again. Like you can have gay bad guys, which you can have more complex characters. And I appreciate that so much. I do also appreciate that there is more awareness of the problem of Bury Your Gaze, that, you know, you kill Star Trek Discovery, which I just absolutely love, ran into that in its first season when it killed one of the only two gay characters. And that was, I mentioned before how much I love fantasy and how much I love Star Trek was always such a crucial part of growing up for me.
Yeah.
And there's this scene in Discovery season 1 where the gay couple are brushing their teeth together. And it's such a crucial scene because finally I'm just seeing that simple domestic moment in a franchise I have loved my entire life and never gotten to see myself in. And then um, it was quite painful to have one of them die. He does come back, but it I yeah I don't I had an early editor for White Trash Warlock who said, "Oh, I want you to kill the love interest. I want you to have him not confess his feelings, and then at the very end of the book, confess his feelings and then die." I'm like, no, that's not happening.
I'm so offended right now. I'm like,
yeah,
a
no,
romance reader, don't you dare.
no, absolutely not. And but it of course the editor was straight and he was coming at it from a place of not understanding. And I tried to gently explain to him, like, do you understand all the negative things you're coming into right here? So you kind of stepped in it. And yeah, I feel like it's important to give a character the right end. Killing a character in general for me is a very bold decision, and I have to make sure that I do it correctly. I do get a little too attached to them. And when I do kill somebody, because there are people who die. Dark Moon Shallow Sea is a good example because since it is epic fantasy and it is set in a more normative world, people are more at risk and not everybody makes it out. But I try to be conscious of character deaths. I don't just want to evoke an emotional reaction in my reader. I want us to have almost a conversation with the reader about a character when it's their time to go. My next book, Rogue Community College, does have a little bit of this as well. It's out in October and it's set in the Atom world. It's a spinoff. And my editor and we had such a delightful conversation about it because she said, it made me sad, but at the same time, I understood. And I don't want to spoil it, but I got into such a constant battle with the book because that book took me longer than any other book to write. And it's the first time I had to ask for an extension because I kept trying to change things. And the book said, no, this is how I end. And so I finally surrendered to accepting it. And the book is what it is.
I'm certain it is going to be lovely. And although I'm glad to know that I should have my handkerchief nearby, as I am a weepy reader, but I have every faith that you will have done justice to your characters because you are very thoughtful. You're thoughtful in the way you talk about writing and books. You are thoughtful in your writing, and in this interview I found you very thoughtful as a person. So I have a lot of faith in your ability to nail this. But I want to talk a little bit about creating and your process. And we've come through a pandemic and you have been publishing during a pandemic, a really hard time to be creating and producing and putting things out there. So are you an author who relies upon outlining and routine and process, or are you someone who is flying by the seat of your pants, getting the ideas down as they come to you?
So I'm a tweener. So there's Plotter, who Katie Edwards is a great example. He plots everything very carefully. He has an extremely intense outline before he begins writing. His every little beat and turn. Kosako Jackson's the same way. Like his outline is absolutely rock solid before he begins writing. And then you have pantsers flying by the seat of your pants, like George R. R. Martin. He is a pantser. I am a tweener, which means that I tend to outline the 5 to 7 big scenes before I begin. So I know how the book is going to end. And I know all the big turning moments in the outline. And then I pants my way between them so that I can still have some discovery and some fun. but I know how it has to end. And Rogue Community College being a great example, I knew how it had to end. And I kept trying to veer off course as I pantsed my way between the dots to connect them. And the
Mm,
book said, no, this is how I end. So I tend to work more like that. I tend to
mm,
work more with the next dot in mind. I need to
mm.
get to the next hill. And then once I got all the pieces, I can connect them in a row and then make sure everything flows well.
Lovely. I like that, the discourse for a long time around many things has been very binary, like you're in either or. And it's a good reminder that very few things are actually in a binary situation, that there's a lot of room in between for your own personal way of creating. So, but you've got this system, you are producing, you are debuting into this world where publishing has really been changing. How has that been for you?
It was nothing like I expected. And that was the biggest thing I had to cope with was so White Trash Warlock came out in 2020 and the pandemic was still on and bookstores were just reopening to the public. And at the time, it was very hard to get a sense of how it was doing because I couldn't go into a bookstore and sign copies. I couldn't do live events in person. And it created this weird, is this working? And in publishing, you should know too that in traditional publishing, you don't get your sales numbers until you get them twice a year, at least accurate numbers. You get some idea on a week to week basis, but the true numbers of how you're doing, you really don't find out unless you hit something like the New York Times, and then you're doing fine, or you're a big name. But for me, I didn't really have any idea because it came out in October until the following April, like how well it did in its first month, and that only covered through the 2 months 2022 of 2020. So it was very hard. It was more difficult in many ways to write Trailer Park Trickster because we had just signed the contract and I got to work right away on Trailer Park Trickster, which was due very quickly. And in some ways it was easy because of the pandemic. I could isolate myself because it was very easy to say, I didn't have to worry about social obligations or hurting anyone's feelings because no one could go anywhere. At the same time, I found I am more of a people person than I thought. I am very introverted, but isolating myself and creating alone can get hard for me. So it is important for me to sometimes be able to see friends and do things. Also, there's the deadline factor. When I created White Trash Warlock, I had all the time I wanted because no one was waiting for
Right.
it. With the sequels and the books I'm writing now, I usually have about 6 months to complete something. So there's a very different angle of that with my day job and just balancing all the parts of my life. I have to be cognizant of delivery.
6 months. That seems so fast to me to produce. And I know that there's an editorial process and all of that, but you are producing these lovely gems in such a short period of time. You must be very rigorous in your writing routine.
You need to be disciplined. And I actually learned that from our delightful mutual friend, Gail Carriger, who,
Mm.
when years ago at one of my first writing conferences where I first met her, she talked about how she treated it like a job. And I completely borrowed that technique from her and listened carefully to what she was saying. So my writing is a second job. Even before I was published, I trained myself to create on schedule, to be in my chair every day, or at least almost every day. Sometimes you get, because burnout's a whole other topic we could talk about
Oh, yes.
and a real risk. But I had to learn to focus myself in ways. And that meant giving up some things I loved. Like I used to, you can probably see them peeking over there on the camera. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons a lot with my friends and for years, but I realized that I needed that time to make my deadlines. So I had to stop, unfortunately, playing. Um, I love video games, but they are an enormous time sink.
Yes, they are.
So had to be like, all right, I have to discipline myself to how much time I spend gaming. Um, yeah, it is rigorous, as you said, and important to find a discipline for you. And it was very scientific for me. I just sat down and looked at all of how I spent my time. I just spent a couple of weeks charting, where does my time go, and how much time am I spending watching television every day? How much time am I spending on the internet surfing every day, or
Mhm.
on TikTok or whatever? And then just looking at what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to let go of. And sometimes, as in the case of gaming, what I had to let go of.
So, given that, I mean, this is very, I think, honest, because as an artist, you are your own boss. You do have to be the one who is setting the tone and making the commitments and following through. It is a lot of hustle all the time. You mentioned burnout. How, what I've personally found is that I have to be feeding my soul a bit to continue to make art and not get too burned out, because the sort of temptation is just to work all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you continue to feed your spirits? How do you continue to fill that creative well and create a creative community for yourself to sort of defend against the burnout?
The biggest thing is to understand when rest is needed, and knowing how to rest and knowing when to rest. Um, I'm very lucky that because of my day job and because the way that I've designed my life, I can travel. So this year, 2023, I went to Venice for the first time with my partner. And then I went to Greece and met my friend Helen. Helen Corcoran came over from Ireland, and we went to Greece for 2 weeks. So, and just drove all over. And I forced myself in both of those cases to not write a word. I
Mm.
didn't. I brought my laptop, I had it, but I didn't work for 3 weeks, and it was delightful. So, because writing is a job and it is work, and burnout is very real, I also just gave myself permission to slow down a little bit. I have a bad habit of when I go overseas to try to see everything I can in a week.
Yeah.
And my partner, knowing that I have that habit, was very wise enough to say, you know what? We're just going to Venice. We're going to one city. We are not going to try to do all of Italy in a week. Um, and also, that gave us the pace to set a slower, calm pace. We also went off season, so there were not as many tourists there and almost no Americans. So because I want an experience away from, I want to get out of my head, out of our world a bit, and go somewhere else. So it's useful to me to be able to travel elsewhere and escape everything going on in art. And that's part of it, because part of the pressure that we feel in our world is current events and the difficulty of just life. And so I was very lucky that I could do that. And Greece was even better. So I call it the compost heap. That's everything that I experience, everything that I ingest. I try to look at what goes into the compost heap, and then will come out later in my creativity to help feed it. And I'm also very aware of what I ingest if it's not helpful. So I realized I was spending a little too much time watching TikTok a day, and usually at night before bed, and scrolling and watching. And I realized it was like eating a lot of junk food for my brain. It wasn't helping me. It wasn't helping me create. It was just kind of a little too much junk. And so I really scaled back on my presence there. And I found that my dreams are a little more creative. My dreams are
Mm.
a little more what I want again. And I'm waking up a little more motivated. So trying to be mindful of what strengthens your creativity and what hurts it, what
Mm.
harms it,
Mm.
I think is something we all should be a little more aware of. And then when I really need an experience locally, because I can't get away, I go work on my garden a bit. I go check on my bees. Um, I've been befriending the local crows and corvids and trying to have a relationship with them every day. So I try to spend time not thinking about my writing, not thinking about my day job, consciously avoiding it. And what I find is when you do that, the creativity will kind of sneak up on you
Mm.
out of the corner of your eye, as it were. So it's like, there's an idea. Then you can bring it into focus.
Mm. Gorgeous. I love this discussion, and I love the way you described it as your compost heap, which some people might say that's not a very romantic, metaphor, but it is about fertilizing. It is about taking your lived experience and, creating that fertile soil for creativity to blossom. And one of the things I find, frankly, is conversations like this, having a community of artists, almost like a traveling salon of, weird bohemians, keeps me feeling creative and inspires me. And hearing about how you process your art, or Gail, or any of the wonderful authors and artists I've had the privilege to meet. But there is a demand in the world for artists, and especially authors these days, to be habitually online and promoting themselves, because there, are not the marketing dollars. So honestly, I have enjoyed your social media presence. But how do you balance marketing yourself and protecting yourself so that you can continue to make art?
It is hard. And, this month, December, I've been stepping back a little bit, putting off a haircut, which has been driving me crazy on this video, actually. I have practical things I need to do. But it's about, I always feel a little bit like, because I do have a day job and I do have a partner, so I always feel like writing time is stolen time. It's uh social media is tough, and it is exhausting. I used to, especially when I first debuted and things, would be incredibly active. And part of that was the pandemic, because online is where we all were. Now there's a little bit of okay, I don't need to be on Twitter as much. I don't need to be as active. And also finding my limits. TikTok is a limit. I don't enjoy myself on video. I don't enjoy making video. But at the same time, it's useful and helpful to connect with readers where you can. There's one thing I wish I had known, that I'd love other authors to know as you're starting to move into it. And I do have a couple of authors I mentor a little bit. Is you really have three jobs as an author. You have your writing job, you have your editing job, and then you have your promotion. And the writing is the fun part.
Mm.
Editing is much more to me sitting in the chair and trying to make it work for everyone, provide as much clarity as possible, and at the same time all the mechanics of it, which is a lot, is architecting and engineering it. I enjoy it, but it is a lot of work. Editing is way more exhausting than writing. And then the third part, the promotion part, is we really need to budget a slice of time for it, more than you might think, especially around release. So Dark Moon Shallow Sea came out on Halloween, October 31st, which is the perfect release date for this book.
Absolutely.
And I traveled for this one. I toured for this one. I got to do an event with Gail in San Francisco, which was amazing. But I did find I pushed myself a little further than I wished, and I had to put a bit of gas back in the tank. So, for example, when I was in San Diego for that event with Jonathan Mayberry, I didn't really leave my hotel room much. I didn't go out and explore as a tourist, because I was finishing edits on Rogue Community College on top of everything else. But you have to be aware of where your time's going. And again, television, I think, is such a great example of this, of how you've probably, everyone I think, has watched TV at some point and realized, wait, it's 10 o'clock. Becoming aware of just how much time you've spent in that chair watching TV. So promotion can be a lot, depending on how you are. If you don't have that outgoing self, I'm a fairly introverted person, but I have a trick that when the right, so today I wore this for you because it seemed to fit your vibe.
Yes, it does. You look so dapper.
Usually I have a jacket on, and when the jacket comes for an event, and that usually tells me that that's my writer uniform, that I'm now going to go teach at a conference or appear, which didn't serve me too well when I was at the Tucson Festival of Books, because I was melting in the darn thing. But the jacket stayed on because that's my mental trigger to now be author person.
Right. No, I find having a uniform, as you say, very helpful as a performer as well. And so I definitely have some of those things. I put certain things on and I'm able to be in that space. But I'm also a massive extrovert. So when I get to chat with people, I'm like, I'm refilling my personal well right now in this instant. And being on my own too much is a really wonderful way to absolutely cause my creativity to wither. So I'm very community driven as a creative person. And I feel like having fellow artists in lots of fields, not just my own, is very critical. But you are doing a thing that I think is so essential and also is a very sort of queer experience as well, which is you are mentoring other people. And I have no idea, although I'm curious, whether your mentees are also part of the LGBTQ community. But I think there is a tradition that we know we need to put that ladder down so other people can climb up with us. And you are doing that. So can you talk
Absolutely.
a little bit about being a mentor of other artists?
It's really just about sharing my experience and also understanding that my experience, your mileage may vary.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened to me in the writing community when I first got out into the writing community was going to conferences and hearing very successful authors speak. And as useful as that can be, sometimes their experience is I published in the 90s and I got this gigantic advance and there was a movie deal immediately and I'm writing full time ever since and making all of this money. And that's generally not how it's going to be for 99% of us. Most,
Right.
you have your rock star authors who are in that tier, but then most of us, though, still have day jobs. Most of us would still consider our writing to be a small business that we run on the side. That's how it is for me. And don't get me wrong, I hope to get there someday. But one of the things that I try to do is sort of gently correct misunderstandings
Mm.
of, and it doesn't help if you watch anything like a Hallmark movie, right? She finishes her first novel and she immediately buys a house with the check that she gets. This very successful author person, and she's that's not generally how it goes. And struggle for me, it was a long struggle to just get an agent, and then it was a long struggle to get published after I had an agent, and I had to switch agents. So one of the things I can do is try to set realistic expectations as well as communicate what is possible, because I don't want to be negative. But the biggest thing I learned in all of my time probably came from Rachel Kane, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And one of the things that she said that at a conference that when I met her that was so useful to me was, you have to make writing your passion and you have to make it your joy. Your creation should be the thing that you look forward to, your escape. That way, even though it is still a second job, you're not burned out on it, you're happy, and you need to also be able to protect that time. So, one of the things I gently try to talk to my mentees about is, focusing on one project, focusing on um, one thing creatively. At the same time, because I did grow up very poor and I did grow up without means or support, teaching them it's okay to survive first. In order to create, I thought Virginia Woolf said it so perfectly in A Room of One's Own, where the whole thesis of that is that in order to create, you must have shelter and you must have food. You must have, and she said, I got an inheritance from an aunt I barely knew, and that allowed me to write. And without those things, I would not have been able to become a writer, become Virginia Woolf. So one of the things I do give my mentees, I try to tell them to give themselves grace to say, look, if you're working two jobs or you're going to school or you're doing these things and you're not writing right now, that's okay. You have to survive first. We have to be mentally healthy to a certain level to be able to create. And that's probably one of the most important things I try to convey is build your life so that you can create. That's one thing I've done is I'm lucky that I have a good day job and I work in software, so I'm well compensated for what I do. But we're a one car household. We live in a modest house that could be bigger if we wanted, but no, I bought a very modest house when I bought a house, and it's it serves our needs. We would certainly expand if we had the chance. But looking at the yard is a good example. I zero escaped most of the yard, so I don't have to spend all weekend, every weekend in the summer on yard care. Just little ways to think of how do you simplify and build your life in a way so that you have time to write and you're not consumed by all the other things that could happen. Like not taking on more pets, or I'm lucky that neither my partner or I want children. And if you want children, absolutely, and you're a parent, that bless you. But I'm glad that for us we don't, because that's more time I have. That's time I'd rather be writing.
Yeah. But
So
it's true though.
yeah,
I mean, children, you wrote the Adam Binder series, you know that children should be cared for and treasured, and that means time.
very much the same attitude I have with my pets. If I'm going to have a pet, it's going to be loved. It's going to be have the best care. My ex said, do you ever want kids? And I said no, because if one of I want if we were to become parents, I would want one of us to be absolutely home when they're not in school. One of us is available to them. Also, all the other, I would want to make sure that they were on time to all the things and give them all the opportunities and music and whatever path they choose to have the full support. And I don't think that's something that we could give. I would not be able to give that because I have my writing. So it's those kinds of, I think the key to happiness in life, or at least contentment, is self-awareness. Knowing yourself, knowing what you can give, and knowing what you want. I have always wanted to be a published author. I have always wanted to be a writer. And I'm very fortunate that I've built my life in a way that allows me to do that.
But as one of your readers, I'm so grateful that you did and that you are writing and that you've kept with it and that we have more things coming. So, and I believe you're going to be at Tucson Festival of Books again this coming year. So, to my delightful, wonderful community who's watching and here in the Zoom with us, mark your calendars, come to TFB, see David, get a book, get all the books, give the books as gifts. Books are great gifts. So, Lady June Squirrel, I promise I will take you to TFB and we will go and we will see David and we'll gush. So, but we have a few moments left. I could keep you here all morning, honestly, because you are a delight and I could follow up on so many questions with you. But I want to give a moment to our wonderful live audience here in the Zoom with us. If either of you have questions, now is your moment. And then, David, I don't know if you are familiar with Proust, but I'm assuming you are. I end things out with a little Madame Askew's Proust questionnaire. So, Lady June, do you have a question for dear David?
I just wanted to say that in looking for reviews of Dark Moon Shallow Sea after I read it, and I'm like, what? I encountered the Joyfully J site
Oh,
where
she's
you have,
delightful.
yes, where you have the models. Oh, yes, I saw that in the background, and I was like, whoa, that isn't exactly what I thought they looked like, but woo-wee.
Well, when you hire models to do a photo shoot, so let me explain from Madame Askew.
Yes, yes.
One of the things I did for this, because and I think my agent still thinks I'm insane for it, but I wanted to try to bring the book to life a little bit. So I put together a whole cosplay photo shoot with a lovely local cosplay photographer, Lost Stars Imaging. She does a lot of the photography for Denver Fan Expo.
Oh, excellent.
And I tried to look at local cosplayers whom I thought might embody the characters well, and I couldn't quite find what I wanted. So I reached out to Wilhelmina Denver, a modeling agency, and I hired these extremely attractive young men who then dressed up as Rafe, Seth, and Kinos. And if you go to Joyfully Jay, just Google that and you'll find her blog and you will find the photo shoot. I did a whole blog post with her on the photo shoot. And we did some behind the scenes picks fun, but it was an utter delight. The boys were incredibly, I should say guys, they are in their early 20s, they're men. The men were all so incredibly professional and wonderful. We did have some very funny moments. So Jake, who played Seth, who was dressed as Seth for the shoot, this with the sword and shield, his arms were sizable and just very fit young man. And we almost couldn't get the armor on him.
Oh my God.
I was so
yeah.
glad. And I had originally intended for him to be in a sleeved shirt, not sleeveless. And I was so glad I brought a tank top because we wouldn't have been able, he would have burst out of any sleeves we tried to put on him.
Yeah, I was just looking at the pictures again and I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, the stylist, Indy Six, a local salon, Angela there, did the makeup and the hair for me, and she was such a delight. But she's like, oh, they're so pretty. They were very pretty.
That's lovely. And I love that you did that for this particular book. I have not finished it, unlike Lady June Squirrel, who's a much faster reader than I am. But it is so lush. And I feel like the characters deserve to be embodied by really beautiful models.
Oh, and can I say one more thing before?
Of course.
I'm rereading the first Adam Binder book, and the trip to Casa Bonita.
Oh my!
Because I went there before it closed years ago. Yes. That place where they have the cliff divers in the restaurant.
Oh, it's open again now.
Is it?
Yeah, the guys from South Park bought it.
Yeah, I had heard they bought it.
You still have to go on the waiting list. We've actually been. They've cleaned it up. They spent something like $4 million just cleaning it.
Oh my God.
Just to clean it top to bottom because it had 50 years of dust in there and grease. They gutted the kitchen. The food is delicious now.
Oh, really?
Well, yes,
they hired cafeteria style before.
It was. I didn't find it as bad as many people did, but again, I grew up poor, so my standard of what is good and bad food is a little off. And so many people complained about the food. The food is delicious now. I will warn you, however, if you order the margaritas, we thought we'd have one each, and they were very, very strong. So they certainly almost knocked me over. But yeah, it's a delight. So if you're in the Denver area, and there used to be one in Tulsa, which I actually went to once as a kid.
Oh, really?
I've been to that one.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's gone now, sadly.
I was to years and years and years and years ago. Our car broke down and we were staying with friends in the Denver area, and we went with their kids and everything. And my daughter still remembers.
Well, if you're ever back in Denver, I highly recommend trying to go back. It is a different experience, but they did such a beautiful job preserving the spirit of it.
Yes.
I will give you a spoiler that if we get more Adam books, which I will have news on that for you very soon, the leprechauns may have chosen a different tower.
Oh.
They have moved their anchor.
I love this.
So
anyway, yes, the books are wonderful. Spent a very short period of time in Denver, but and I love Adam, and I just ache for him. He's one of those characters like Gail's characters that I just ache for. So.
He's a good boy.
He is a good boy.
Adam's my good. Rafe is my angry boy. Adam is my good boy.
Well, poor Rafe, God, but I didn't expect what happened with Kinos, but anyway, there you are.
First love can be tough.
Oh, well, and you have that in the Adam Binder books as well.
I definitely, those of you who read my work may find a theme that first love is often hard. Even if you read To Catch a Geek on the Kiss app, you might find first loves can be hard. Mine was extremely hard. So.
Oh, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Lady June Squirrel. And you've opened up another avenue of questions, but I'm going to avoid it, even though I want to, because Bill, now is your moment. Do you have a question for our guest?
I do, yeah. David, thanks for being here. This has been really fun and very educational to listen to. I'm wondering if how listening to you making a personal connection, I had your books on my to be read list for a while, and just there's so much stuff coming out that it's hard to, you have to pick and choose what.
I understand
Making this
completely.
personal connection, I'm much more interested in reading them right away now. Just being able to listen to you talk, it's been really fun. How important is it, do you think, for an author to have a presence at conventions to be able to make that kind of connection with people?
I think it's so one of the things I've learned from touring for Dark Moon Shallow Sea, this is a really great question, especially for aspiring authors or people who are publishing. Live events are dying when it comes to bookstore events. So what I mean by that is, yeah, when you look at the cost investment. Now, if you're a rock star like TJ Klune, you're going to get a full house, and that's going to be worth it for the store. And I don't regret any of the travel I did this fall for Dark Moon. I had some amazing experiences. I got to do an event with Gail Carriger, which is literally a career dream, life dream of mine. That said, attendance was pretty low at all of them. And I did events with Jonathan Mayberry, with Gail. I got to go to Seattle with Django Wexler, who's also huge in fantasy. And so essentially, with live events getting lower attendance now, and I think part of that is because readers have access to us in forums like this, and they have so much access to us on social media, that one of the things I have found that has been incredible for me is I get a table at Denver Fan Expo. My publisher brought me to New York Comic Con this fall, actually for the last 2 falls. And I'm going to hopefully be back next year for Rogue Community College. And I'm going to try to put in panels and actually have a bigger presence. I feel like conventions are very much worth the investment because you have the marketing is already there for the event. People are already at the event coming. Getting to be in Blackstone's booth at New York Comic Con was incredible because people were coming for a lot of other reasons. And then they got to see me and I got to meet them. So, and then some people, were like, oh, I'm here anyway. I get to talk to David. And I actually got to meet a couple of people who were there, like my friend Simeon, who lives in Chicago. So he was actually just in New York. So I got to meet him at New York Comic Con. So I feel like cons are a really excellent place to both connect with people who have met you or heard of you or read your work, and to find new readers, which is really what it's all about. You want to try to grow an audience or introduce your work to more people. So having a table at Denver Fan Expo has been something, because there wasn't a bookstore there the last couple of years. So when the Tattered Cover or other stores had a presence, I could just kind of piggyback on that, which was nice because then I don't have to haul all my books in. But having a table there now myself, it's really nice because people want to come by and talk to you, and they can have access to you for as long as they want, as opposed to like a limited signing time where you're like, I'm only going to be here for 2 hours. So if I'm there all weekend, someone can circle back or have time. So yeah, I really do feel like cons are a place to build readership. And a lot of my indie author friends have big success time. Like, that was phrased poorly. They have a very successful time at conventions. And an indie author makes more per copy than a trad author. So it's important to understand that, we tend to make 10 to 15% depending on format and where we are in the sales cycle per book. An indie author only has their production costs or shipping costs, and it all goes back to them. It doesn't go to the publisher. So for them, making their table and making the cost of having a table at an event takes a much lower threshold. So they tend to make a higher profit. So my indie friends really like conventions. And then I found I'm still making table and connecting with readers and having a great time. But yeah, I honestly, if I had to choose between the two, I would go with con over bookstore event. I probably won't travel as much for bookstore events now, unless depending on what's paid for and what's covered, because most of the time you cover it yourself, but the return on investment just isn't there. That said, again, I have zero regrets about the travel I've had. I have zero regrets about the travel I'm making next year, like to Tucson, etc. But I would say cons are where it's at. That's a much stronger presence. There's also a lot of writers there and authors there. So you get to connect with other people who write, and the fan base is much tighter to fantasy or science fiction. So you can connect with fans who are really into what you're doing specifically.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Bill. Great question. David, fantastic answers. Thank you. I'm going to now barrage you with my interpretation of the Proust questionnaire. So I hope you are ready.
I'm taking a sip of coffee, so fire away.
All right. So my first question is, what are your favorite qualities in a human being?
Kindness is number one.
Mm.
I love people who are just kind. It's the most important thing. I especially love that quote from Terry Pratchett where he said, "Fairy godmothers get a deep insight to human nature, which makes the evil ones very powerful and the good ones very kind."
It's lovely. Also, thanks for mentioning Terry Pratchett. What do you appreciate the most in your friends?
Kindness is another one, but being supportive, and especially the ability to forgive themselves, to forgive me, because goodness knows I make mistakes. um I have such a variety of friends, and I guess I'm going to say diversity, because I don't surround myself with just one type of person. I don't surround myself with like, one of my best friends is 78 and one of my best friends is 30, and that tells you pretty much everything you need to know.
I love that. What is the virtue you strive for the most in yourself?
Probably kindness again, though I really believe in self-improvement. I believe in continuous improvement, whether that's in my writing, my craft, whether it's in just whatever I choose to do in my time on this earth. I don't care how you spend your time on this earth, as long as it doesn't harm others. But I feel that continuous improvement is something I admire so much in people, and it's something I strive for all the time. So I never want to stop growing. I never want to stop learning new things, trying new things. It's something, again, Jo is 78 and she's such a blessing to me, because I can see how somebody that age can continually grow and change and learn and try new things and travel and do things. I never want to stagnate. So that's what I strive for.
Gorgeous. What is your ideal occupation for an afternoon?
Writing. I know you'll be shocked. So give me a big pot of delicious coffee, a quiet with my cat by my side, and a no interruptions on maybe add a little bit of snow or fog, so I can just occasionally look out the window and wistfully sigh and then go back to creating.
I love that. So cozy. What is your idea of happiness?
That's an interesting one. I guess the ideal, like for me, if I pictured like what would my ideal happiness be, it would be um sitting with an ocean view of some kind and a laptop. My partner and I took a cruise a few years ago, just the two of us, and it was delightful because we got a balcony room. And he had his Nintendo Switch and was delightfully lost in a video game, while I was delightfully lost in writing. And every once in a while, we would run down to the cafe to get an iced coffee with Bailey's and an iced latte, iced chai with Bailey's. And that was probably the closest to pure happiness I've ever had.
Oh, I love that. It sounds really delightful. All right. And what is your idea of misery?
Oh boy. Working in a cubicle in a loud office environment, where I have to be treated poorly, which I have experienced, and I literally have nightmares about it again from time to time. Like, I had this terrible nightmare that something happens to my job and my livelihood, and I have to go back to that environment, and I'm working with that is that, and I found my joy in some ways because I commuted on the bus and I'd spend that time. I put on a terrible face, big headphones, and spend the hour on the bus riding both ways, and that helped a lot. But I don't think I've ever been more unhappy in my life than that time.
Well, I'm glad you're not there anymore and you're where you are now. But following up on that, what is your favorite swear or minced oath? Sometimes we are not swearers, although I am.
Am I allowed to say it on here? Should I
Yes,
say it on here?
yes, you can.
I really like the term fuck chop. Because it has such a beautiful, like that double K, you know, chop. I just think it's got such a oh kitty. It's got such a lovely tone right in the middle, and it just gets it all out, you know. I like Farscape used Frel, or Battlestar Galactica used frack, and I think frack works better because that K, you just need that K sound, you know.
You do.
And it just really gets it off your chest.
You need that voiceless stop in your swears, I think. It really makes them forceful. Yeah, no, mouth feels very important to me with swears. And I have to say, fuck chop is a really good one. I love it. So David, thank you for this time. Thank you for being with us. I hope you'll let me have you back sometime in the future.
Anytime.
I'm so excited for your upcoming books. I'm loving your current books. Listen, my darlings, 'tis the season to treat yourselves to good books, and Dark Moon's Shallow Sea is absolutely luscious and beautiful, and also full of the humor and snark and humanity that I come to expect from David after reading the Adam Binder books, because you do that. You make your characters so beautifully real and human, and that is a gift. So thank you, David, for being such a generous author, and thank you everyone for joining us today. To those of you on Facebook, thank you for watching along. This video will also make its way onto YouTube. If you would like to find out more about David, he has a beautiful website, very well maintained, very beautifully designed. Well done, David. But you're also available on social media. I'll see you at the end of the month for the Cog Match game. Please remember, the best gift you can give an author is leaving reviews and encouraging people to read their books at your local library, at your indie bookstore, or at the Zon, if that's what you need to do. A sale is a sale. So happy holidays, everyone. I'm going to take us off of Facebook. See you soon. Cheers.